Le Mans. Just the name alone carries weight. It's not just a race, it's an endurance war, a test of speed, stamina, and survival. For nearly a century, the 24 Hours of Le Mans has been the crown jewel of motorsport, a stage where giants are made and reputations are broken. By the late 1990s, it was also the battleground for car makers desperate to prove their engineering supremacy. In 1999, one of the most legendary names in automotive history stepped onto that battlefield with one mission: domination. Mercedes-Benz, a brand synonymous with precision, innovation, and victories stretching back to the dawn of racing, unveiled a machine it believed would crush the competition. It was called the Mercedes-Benz CLR, a sleek, futuristic prototype built for nothing less than total victory at Le Mans. The CLR was unlike anything the world had seen before, ultra-low, razor-thin, and sculpted. For maximum aerodynamic efficiency, it looked more like a spaceship than a race car. On paper, it was a masterpiece, a car that could slice through the air, hug the ground, and carry the three-pointed star back to the top of endurance racing. But beneath that cutting-edge design lay a flaw so catastrophic it would turn the CLR into one of the most infamous cars ever built. As the green flag waved at Le Mans in June 1999, few could have imagined what was about to happen. Within hours, the world would watch in horror as the CLR did the unthinkable. Not crash into barriers, not suffer mechanical failure, but literally take flight. Twice in practice, once during the race itself, Mercedes' dream car launched into the air like a missile, flipping violently before crashing back to Earth. The images of a silver car pirouetting through the sky would become burned into racing history. For Mercedes, it was a nightmare. For motorsport, it was a wake-up call. And for the CLR itself, it was an epitaph, the race car that should never have flown. This is the story of how one of the most powerful automakers on Earth created a machine so extreme, so dangerous, that it not only ended its own career in disgrace, but also forced an entire sport to change forever. The Mercedes-Benz CLR, the deadly Le Mans car that took flight. The birth of the CLR, Mercedes gamble. By the late 1990s, endurance racing had entered a new golden age. Manufacturers weren't just building race cars, they were waging technological wars. Toyota, BMW, Nissan, Audi, and Porsche were all locked in battle for glory at Le Mans, each trying to outdo the others. With more power, more efficiency, and more daring aerodynamics. For Mercedes-Benz, a company with a reputation for engineering perfection, anything less than victory was unacceptable. The brand's modern resurgence in endurance racing had already delivered success. In 1997 and 1998, Mercedes campaigned the CLK GTR and its evolution, the CLK-LM. These cars were brutally fast, dominating the FIA GT championship and putting Mercedes firmly back in the spotlight. But Le Mans was still unfinished business. Winning there wasn't just about trophies, it was about global prestige. If a manufacturer could survive 24 hours at Circuit de la Sarthe, it proved their engineering was unmatched. So, in 1999, Mercedes unveiled its ultimate weapon, the CLR. The car was designed under the FIA and ACO's rules for the LMGTP class, which allowed closed cockpit prototypes. These rules encouraged manufacturers to build race cars that were almost indistinguishable from spaceships, and Mercedes went all in. The CLR was an aerodynamic extreme. Engineers believed that the lower the car, the better the speed. So, They built it with an impossibly low nose and long overhangs. Every surface was sculpted to reduce drag and maximize airflow efficiency. To the wind tunnel, it looked perfect, a bullet designed to slice through the air at over 200 miles per hour. But there was a hidden cost. By making the CLR so low and sleek, the car sacrificed stability, aerodynamic downforce. The invisible force that presses a car onto the track depends on airflow and balance. If air gets trapped under the car or if the nose lifts even slightly at high speeds, the result can be catastrophic. At the time, Mercedes engineers either underestimated this risk or chose to gamble with it. The CLR's birth wasn't just about physics, it was about pride. Mercedes wanted to prove that it could out-engineer Toyota's GT1, Nissan's R390, and BMW's V12 LMR. The pressure was immense and deadlines were tight. Instead of refining the design over years, the CLR was rushed into existence with limited real-world testing before Le Mans. On paper, it was a marvel, a carbon fiber monocoque, a 5.0-liter V8 engine producing around 600 horsepower and one of the sleekest silhouettes ever seen in racing. To the boardrooms in Stuttgart, it looked like a guaranteed winner. To the drivers, it was a rocket ship waiting to be unleashed, but as the world would soon discover, beneath that polished silver skin lurked a fatal flaw, one that would turn Mercedes' proud gamble into one of motorsport's darkest embarrassments. Warning signs. Practice goes wrong. From the very first laps at Le Mans in June 1999, something about the Mercedes-Benz CLR felt off. To the naked eye, the car looked like the future, low, sleek, and painted in Mercedes. Signature silver, it seemed like a spaceship rolling down the Mulsanne Strait. But to the drivers strapped inside, the reality was far more unsettling. The car felt light almost too. Light especially at high speeds. Tiny bumps in the track unsettled it. Quick directional changes caused the nose to twitch. And worst of all, under certain conditions, the CLR had a terrifying tendency to lift. The first major scare came in practice. Mark Webber, then a young rising star, was piloting the CLR at blistering speed. As he approached a crest in the circuit, air caught under the car's flat nose. In an instant, the Mercedes transformed from race car to airplane. The front end lifted violently. The entire car launched skyward, and it somersaulted through the air, before crashing back down in a shower of carbon fiber. Miraculously, Webber climbed out, unhurt. The paddock was stunned. Cars crashing was one thing, but cars flying? That was something else entirely. Mercedes scrambled to explain. Some claimed it was a freak accident triggered by unusual airflow. Others whispered that the car's extreme low-slung design was inherently unstable. Engineers went back to the garage, adding makeshift fixes, tweaks to the suspension, adjustments to ride height, even little winglets on the nose. The team insisted the CLR was safe to race, but the nightmare wasn't over. During the warm-up the very next day, Webber experienced the exact same disaster again. His CLR lifted off, cartwheeled through the air, and smashed to the ground. Two identical accidents, both at high speed, both involving the same driver. If there were any doubts. Before, they were gone now. Something was fundamentally wrong with the Mercedes-Benz CLR. By now, rival teams, officials, and fans were deeply concerned. The sight of a Le Mans car soaring through the air like a toy plane was too disturbing to ignore. Yet, Mercedes pressed forward. They reassured the FIA that the problem was under control, that adjustments had solved the instability. To withdraw before the race would have meant public humiliation A. Disaster for a brand built on reputation. Mark Webber, shaken but unhurt, was benched for race day, but his teammates, including Christophe Bouchot, Jean-Marc Gounon, and rising star Peter Dumbreck, would still take the wheel. For them, the CLR wasn't just a car, it was a time bomb. Looking back, the warning signs were clear. The CLR's extreme aerodynamics had created a razor-thin margin between grip and catastrophe. All it took was the wrong bump, the wrong draft, or the wrong angle for physics to flip against Mercedes. The crashes in. Practice should have been the alarm that stopped everything. Instead, they were dismissed as anomalies, and so as the world's eyes turned to the start of the 1999 24th hours of Le Mans, the CLR remained on the grid. It was a gamble Mercedes would soon regret in the most public, dramatic, and unforgettable way possible. Race day disaster. The CLR takes flight. When the sun rose on June 12, 1999, the 24 hours of Le Mans began like every other year. Thousands of fans packed into the grandstands, engines roaring, and a sense of anticipation hanging thick in the air. For Mercedes-Benz, this was supposed to be their triumphant return, a chance to prove German engineering dominance on the world's biggest stage, but beneath the polished image and corporate confidence, unease lingered. Everyone in the paddock knew about Mark Webber's twin crashes in practice and warm-up. Two CLRs had already gone airborne, flipping like kites in the wind. Mercedes had reassured officials that tweaks had solved the problem, yet whispers filled the pit lane. Rival teams looked on nervously, fans, many of whom had seen Webber's horrifying crashes replayed on TV, waited with both excitement and dread. As the green flag waved, the race unfolded at blistering speed. The CLRs, with their low drag and monstrous speed, sliced through the night with surgical precision. But every time one of the silver machines approached a crest or drafted closely behind another car, hearts in the pit boxes skipped a beat. The threat of liftoff hung over the team like a shadow. Then, just hours into the race, the nightmare everyone feared came true. Peter Dumbreck, driving at over 180 miles per hour, tucked in behind a Toyota GT1 as they stormed down a fast section of the track. In an instant, the dirty air from the Toyota unsettled the CLR. The nose twitched, lifted, and then the unthinkable happened. The Mercedes took flight. The car didn't just bounce or skid, it launched. It soared into the air, like a missile flipping backwards in a sickening arc. Spectators gasped in horror as the CLR cleared the track barriers and disappeared into the trees. The live TV cameras captured every second of it, the car cartwheeling, disintegrating, vanishing from sight. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Had Dumbreck survived? Miraculously, yes. After what seemed like an eternity, word came over the radios. Peter Dumbreck was alive. He had climbed out of the shredded remains of the CLR with only minor injuries. But for Mercedes, survival was no victory. The crash was a global embarrassment. Millions, watching around the world, had just witnessed their cutting-edge race car transform into an airborne disaster. In the Mercedes garage, panic turned to resignation. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a freak accident. This was proof, undeniable and horrifying, that the CLR was fundamentally unsafe. With 2 practice crashes and now a catastrophic live televised wreck, the team had no choice. Mercedes withdrew the remaining cars from the race, packing up in silence, while the rest of the grid pressed on. For Le Mans, the show went on. For Mercedes, it was a nightmare etched in history. Their silver arrow had promised glory, but delivered humiliation and nearly tragedy. The image of Dumrex CLR sailing through the air became one of the most infamous moments in motorsport, a cautionary tale of engineering taken too far. The disaster had unfolded in full view of the world, and the consequences for Mercedes-Benz and for racing were only just beginning. The fallout, bans, redesigns, and Mercedes' retreat. When Peter Dumbrex's CLR took flight at Le Mans in 1999, the consequences rippled far beyond the track. This wasn't just a racing incident, it was a full-blown crisis that shook Mercedes-Benz, the FIA, and endurance racing itself. The FIA, racing's governing body, moved quickly. The CLR's flight wasn't a fluke, it was a warning. Cars had become so aerodynamically extreme that stability was no longer guaranteed. Regulators feared that if they didn't step in, the next airborne accident might not end with a miracle escape. Within weeks, new rules were drafted. Ground effect. Underbodies were scrutinized, minimum ride heights were raised, and designs that risked generating unstable lift were effectively outlawed. The CLR had forced racing authorities to admit what many already suspected: speed was nothing without safety. For Mercedes-Benz, the embarrassment was total. This was a company that prided itself on precision, discipline, and engineering superiority. Yet here they were, with the world watching, their multi-million-dollar race car tumbling like a toy in the wind. Corporate executives in Stuttgart were furious. Engineers were devastated. Drivers, though grateful to be alive, were shaken to their core. And then came the decision that would define Mercedes' racing future. They pulled out, not just from Le Mans, not just from endurance racing. Mercedes withdrew entirely from top-level sports car competition. The CLR disaster had burned them too deeply. For a company obsessed with reputation, the risk of another public humiliation was unacceptable. Their return to Le Mans glory, so confidently planned, was abandoned overnight. But the fallout wasn't just about Mercedes. Other manufacturers were forced to rethink their approach as well. Toyota, BMW, Audi, and others who had been pushing the aerodynamic limits took notice. Designers scaled back the extreme shapes. Safety was prioritized in ways it hadn't been before. The CLR became the textbook example of how not to design a race car, a warning that sometimes chasing ultimate speed means flirting with disaster. Fans, too, were changed by what they had seen. The sight of Dumbrex's car flying off the track was burned into their memories. It wasn't just terrifying, it was surreal. Racing was supposed to be dangerous, yes, but this was something else entirely. Cars weren't supposed to become airplanes every time a prototype crested a hill or drafted closely behind another. Fans now held their breath. The trust between audience and machine had been shaken. For Peter Dumbreck, the man at the center of it all, survival became both a blessing and a curse. He would go on to continue racing, but he would forever be remembered as the man who flew at Le Mans. In interviews, he admitted that the moment was surreal, that one second he was driving at 180 miles per hour, and the next he was staring at treetops. His survival became proof of racing's paradox. Its danger was what made it thrilling, but it was also what made it unforgivable. Mercedes, however, wanted no part of the legend. They buried the CLR's memory as quickly as they could, refusing to display the cars or even acknowledge them in official histories. It was as though the CLR never existed. Yet the images were impossible to erase. Fans and journalists continued to replay the footage, dissect the design, and speculate. about how one of the most powerful engineering companies in the world could make such. A fatal miscalculation, and in a way, the CLR's legacy lives on not as a triumph, but as a warning. Modern endurance cars, with their tighter regulations and safer aerodynamics, exist because of that disaster. The lessons learned in 1999 prevented future tragedies. Mercedes had failed, but racing had evolved. Still, one truth remained. The CLR had ended Mercedes-Benz's Le Mans dream. Their silver. Aero was supposed to conquer the French classic, to stand shoulder to shoulder with Porsche and Ferrari in motorsport history. Instead, it became a symbol of hubris and humiliation, a reminder that even giants can fall, and sometimes they fall from the sky. Legacy of the CLR, the race car that flew too high. In motorsport, legends are often built on victories, cars that conquered, drivers who triumphant, teams that rewrote the record books. But sometimes legends are forged in failure. The Mercedes-Benz CLR is one of those rare machines remembered not for what it won, but for what it lost and what it taught. On paper, the CLR had all the makings of a champion. It was sleek, powerful, and backed by one of the most formidable engineering forces in the world. Mercedes-Benz had entered Le Mans with the full intention of reclaiming glory, bringing German precision and prestige to the most famous endurance race on Earth. Yet, in the end, the car's fatal flaw ensured that its place in history would be carved not in silver, but in fire and fear. The CLR's airborne accidents became more than just a spectacle. They became a turning point. Racing had flirted with danger before, but this was different. This was a car, transforming into a missile before the eyes of millions, a reminder that aerodynamics could betray even the greatest minds. Regulators, manufacturers, and fans alike were forced to confront the limits of technology. The CLR was a wake-up call. If left unchecked, innovation could cross into catastrophe. In Stuttgart, Mercedes chose silence. The company that once celebrated every engineering milestone now treated the CLR like a ghost. It never appeared in official museums, never. Headlined anniversary celebrations, never even received the sort of romanticized storytelling that other failed projects often enjoy. For Mercedes, the CLR wasn't a bold experiment gone wrong. It was a scar best hidden, but history doesn't forget. Motorsport. Fans still debate the CLR 2 decades later. Was it arrogance, miscalculation, a perfect storm of flawed design and dangerous track conditions? Whatever the cause, the car became a permanent entry in the long list of motorsport's cautionary tales right alongside Group B rally monsters, the Ford Kammerban, and Porsche's 917 Windowmaker. Most importantly, the CLR's disaster made racing safer. Regulations tightened, car designs changed, and teams placed a greater emphasis on stability and survivability. Today's endurance prototypes, while still blisteringly fast, are shaped by lessons learned from Mercedes' nightmare in 1999. Peter Dumbrecht's survival wasn't just a miracle, it was the reason the FIA realized changes had to be made before tragedy struck again. And so, the CLR endures. Not in Mercedes' glossy brochures, but in the grainy TV footage of a car rising, like a plane. Not in trophies, but in rule books rewritten to protect the next generation of drivers. Not as a champion, but as a warning. In the end, the CLR's story proves a timeless truth. In the pursuit of speed, hubris can be as dangerous as horsepower. Mercedes-Benz aimed for the skies, but at Le Mans, they flew too high. If you enjoyed this incredible story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more epic automotive adventures. Your support keeps these stories alive.